Welcome to the Echo Essentials podcast.
I'm Dave Dale.
And I'm Scott Clark.
And yeah, I'm Chris Piekarski.
It blew right out of the gate. Chris Piekarski.
Yeah.
Our newest member to the North Bay Echo team. Chris, welcome to the team.
Well, thanks, fellas. It's nice to be here, and it's been a great week and a half, I guess.
Yeah.
It's been bumping. It's been busy.
So tell us about yourself and,
Sure.
and what you're doing here.
Totally. So if we're going to get technical, I am the Director of Content and Client Strategy here with Echo. I come from North Bay, Ontario. I'm from the area. I've done my study here with Nipissing University, did some time in Ottawa. I'm a postgraduate from Seneca York in Toronto in public relations, corporate communications. And so I'm here to kind of help figure out some more of the directional stuff of the Echo Podcast Network and to help the whole team out. So, yeah.
Cool. Nancy, you were standing in here this week. She was doing an interview with the robotics team.
Yes.
And she looked at you right away and she said, Piekarski, your family's well known in this region, right?
Apparently. I mean, hopefully for positive reasons, but not nothing notorious. But no, yeah, our family's in Powassan. I was born and raised in North Bay. I got the joke that we're the Piekarski outlaws. We were born in the city, not the countryside. Yeah. But yeah, so our family was raised here in Pinewood. I went to school here. I went to university here. So yeah, just very much in the community in different pockets and areas. But I was pretty involved in my undergraduate study. I did a lot of student politics. I did a lot of orientation week. So I think I'm fairly connected, but I'll be surprised here and there. So
You're a Scholar grad, eh?
I am.
Right
Yeah. I graduated in 2009, which makes me feel older by the day. But
And you did some comms for Catholic School Board?
I did. Yeah. So I was the communications officer for the Nipissing Parry Sound Catholic District School Board, which is a mouthful in title. So we used to call it NPSC, and they still do. And after a year and a half, I decided to look for something different. Loved the work, and here I am.
And you worked on some podcasting with them.
Yeah. So when I was at the university, I worked in student recruitment at Nipissing University for quite a long time, off and on. I helped them start their brand new start. New was NU, of course. Well done on that one, I think. And then we had 2 seasons of that, and they did a season without me when I left. And then through my work at the Catholic School Board with St. Joe's Scholar Hall, the media arts teacher was like, we need to create a podcast. Mm-hmm. The students want this to happen. We need some direction. So obviously, I was the person in play. So I came down and helped out and helped them kind of, get the roots all settled. And so I helped them kind of find their podcast voice. And we had kind of like a fun little tryout session to figure out who was going to be a good ad read person, who was going to be a good host, what kind of dynamics did they have, and really kind of help them cultivate what is known as the Bears Den podcast. P-A-W. Yeah.
I like it.
Well, You got everything you need to do a good job here then.
I think so. I mean, the team's been great. There's so many different tools and opportunities, and the future is limitless. I think there's so much opportunity here. So
one of the things you and I talked about a lot, Dave, was it's 2 older white guys. I'm not going to say old. I'm going to say older white guys talking about community events and stuff. And we said, wouldn't it be good to have, a younger perspective? Mm-hmm. And that's, Chris has come on the scene here. So I'm gonna personally step back a little bit here and chime in every now and again, but when you ask me,
for sure,
but not when I say anything. So I'm looking forward to that because as the network grows here too, right? There's things that have to be done outside of here as well, and this takes I appreciate how much time you guys put into this. So there's stuff that has to happen outside here as well. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to your success, Chris, in bestowing the virtues of the Echo Network that Dave and I over a cup of coffee said this might be an interesting idea to do, and here it is now. It's growing and our sponsors continue to grow, and today's episode is brought to you by North Bay Toyota, and excited to have them on board. I even went out and got a RAV for my lovely wife so she can have a RAV to drive from North Bay Toyota as well. So looking forward to that. Thanks, Roberto.
It's time to Toyota at North Bay Toyota. From the bold and adventurous RAV4 to the fuel-efficient and stylish Corolla Cross to the powerful and rugged Tacoma, there's a Toyota for everyone. Need extra space? The Highlander, Grand Highlander, and Sienna have room for the whole family. Want to go green? Check out Toyota's complete lineup of hybrid vehicles like the Prius, Camry, Crown, and all-new Crown Signia, and more. Wherever you're headed, Toyota's legendary reliability, advanced safety features, and cutting-edge technology will get you there with confidence. It's time to Toyota at North Bay Toyota, 640 McEwen, or online at northbaytoyota.com for details.
So one of your first podcasts out of the gate here is someone you actually know.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, I have some connections with Nipissing University. And so for my time working in recruitment, we did all kinds of on-campus activities. And there was very much like a many hands make light work. And so one of the prominent voices who always used to help with the recruitment efforts was Dr. David Tabachnick, who comes from the political science program at Nipissing. And so in lead up to our election coverage, we thought, well, let's bring him on. It's kind of a nice little preamble to kind of discuss, some of the more local issues, some of the broader issues, and to kind of like a really good conversation to kind of get us all started.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I actually approached him a few years ago because he just lives down the street from our studios here. And his voice is so unique. I said, would you consider doing any voice work for us? Because I don't know what for. And he says, yeah, but if you need me at any time, but his voice is so unique. I'm trying to think of the actor that his voice is similar to, but I thought it would be just having a different style voice as opposed to, this traditional kind of radio voice that we have. So
He reminds me of the biologist from Jaws, actually.
Richard Dreyfuss? Yeah. I can see a little of that.
Yeah.
I can see a little
He carries
of that.
It was great actually doing that podcast with him because I've heard about him and read some of his stuff all through the years, but we have never met. Right. And he had been following me as some of the stuff I've been doing. So it was great to be able to talk about some real political science type issues like strategic voting. We covered what is good and not so good about polling and how to interpret it. And we talked about some of the background and the various parties and how historic this particular election is and why. So that was an excellent first start, I think.
Yeah, it was great. It was nice to kind of open it up and talk about some of the issues that were broad and how it might affect Nipissing Temiskaming riders in elections here. And so it was really good to kind of like just crack it open.
Yeah, I think it's a good start.
A friend of mine said to me, I was asking about this election and how, the polls have changed so dramatically on the national level over the last month or so. And he said to me very adamantly, and this is a bit of a political guy, and what's interesting, he's more, in his past, I think he was more of a liberal guy, now much more conservative guy. He said, just like the elections in the United States, the pollsters have it all wrong, and what you're seeing now is not true. And he said, you watch when this happens, it's going to swing the other way, and the liberals won't see what's coming. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. So I'm really interested. I wasn't in the podcast, so I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say about what's coming up in this election. And does this also mean both of you will have a chance to interview all the candidates too?
Yeah, so we're working a bit on getting them in here. We have a couple things lined up right now, so we can't confirm anything in case things change. But we're definitely looking at getting them all in here to have a bit of a profile look at the person, the candidate as well, and like the greater scheme of their policies and how it interacts with the area.
Cool, that's great.
And I think about when we're talking about the difference, and you'll see this in this interview with David, if you separate out what you see in Alberta from what we see in Ontario and the dynamics involved here, the polls may or may not be out. Like 14,000 people in Edmonton is one thing, and big crowds in Kingston when he was there. But we all know the battleground is the Toronto area and those ridings and Quebec. That's going to sway a lot. And then he describes it a lot better.
Yeah. And one thing just to continue off that point, Dave, is that he brought up really well was like the people that were being drawn from the polls are those who are saying like, I'll participate in the poll. But like those who are not participating in the polls aren't counted in, right? And so it's like projections and there's room for error. And so we really don't know. It looks like it's going to be pretty tight, but it's going to be really keen to see next couple of weeks how things figure out.
Yeah, and it's interesting how I forget. I was listening to Canada Land. If you don't have a chance to listen to Canada Land, please do. It's just a great podcast, and they really lean into a lot of the politics right now. And they talked about all these different things. I forget what it's called. It's called ops or something like that, where the opposition will do research on each of the. They're doing something right now where you can punch in the name of your candidates, and they'll actually do some research on your candidates. Like journalists will do Google searches, and they say the opposition does that about other candidates, and they wait and how they roll this out. So the candidates in our riding in Temiskaming, on Nipissing Temiskaming here, really interesting to see what happens because the Conservative candidate is a very seasoned PR person, right? And so it'll be really interesting to see how all the different candidates play out just in this region alone, and what's going to happen and what's going to drop over the next number of weeks.
It's going to be fun. Honestly, it's going to be fun to have those conversations and see who comes in. And I'm really keen to see how this plays out, especially at the local level.
Well, buckle up, and we're starting off with our podcast interview with Dr. David Tabachnick. Today, our guest is political science professor at Nipissing University, Dave Tabachnick.
Sounds right to me.
Is that close enough?
Good enough for me.
Say it so we all hear it.
Okay, Professor David Tabachnick.
Yeah, there you go. Right on.
I always call you professor from my time working in university, but do you want to give us, our listeners and our viewers a little more about yourself? Because I have all these notes, but how would you like to go about that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. As I mentioned, I'm a professor of political science at Nipissing University. I've been there for 20 years. It's hard to believe, obviously in North Bay for that long as well. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Ottawa and, was somewhat immersed in political things. My father was a very sort of politically aware guy, read a lot of newspapers, watched the news all of the time. So kind of just by osmosis, I knew about current events and politics I didn't even realize. And by the time I went to university, not really knowing what I wanted to do, I basically wandered into a political science class and just loved it immediately. And so I also met my wife while I was there. I studied at Dalhousie in Halifax, and she decided that she wanted to be a forester. So after we sort of got to know each other, she said, I'm going to Lakehead in Thunder Bay, Ontario. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And I ended up going with her. So I left Dal and went to Lakehead. And so that was my first real experience with Northwestern Ontario, and loved it. I really just immersed myself in the culture and the university. Obviously, really enjoyed the course of study I engaged in, loved the small school as well, and then went off, of course, to do my master's and PhD, both at Carleton University in Ottawa, and then sort of bounced around a bit, having children along the way. I was in Alberta for a couple of years. I was actually in Portland, Oregon, as a Fulbright research scholar. Sounds impressive.
Okay.
I was pretty impressed. And then ended up here in North Bay. I interviewed and loved it, and they offered me the job, and I haven't looked back since.
What was your father's line of work?
My father was a journalist for his sort of first job. He worked in Alberta, so that's where he's from. He's from Calgary. And then got involved kind of in, I'd say, left-wing politics, actually. So he knew people like Tommy Douglas and Ed Broadbent, kind of the sort of beginnings of the NDP, and started to get involved more in the labor movement, and ultimately landed a job basically in public relations for the Canadian Union of Public Employees, or CUPE, where he did almost the rest of his career, 35 years in that kind of environment, but always sort of engaged in the political, as one would in the labor movement. And again, as I mentioned, it rubbed off on me.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Well, we're here to talk about the federal election, vote April 28th. My first question is my feeling is that this is a historic election, and by the way it's been set up. Tell us why it's historic, if you agree.
I do agree. I think, of course, as everybody knows, the sort of context here is Trump and his tariffs, and including some of his comments which have faded away a little bit around Canada becoming the 51st state, essentially annexing Canada to become part of the United States. This was at first taken as a joke, and then we kind of realized that, in fact, it was a betrayal. We, of course, have been integrated with the United States and its economy for decades. Starting in 1960, for example, we integrated our auto sector with the Auto Pact. And then famously, in 1988, we had another very historic election, the free trade election, sort of that battle between Brian Mulroney and John Turner. And of course, Mulroney won. And because Mulroney won, we had our first free trade agreement. And we didn't really look back. We had NAFTA after that and a series of other free trade agreements. In fact, I think it was just in 2015 we signed an agreement with the European Union. So we were all about free trade until Donald Trump and his tariffs. And so Now we have to reassess, don't we? We have to sort of decide where we are, not just in our relationship with the United States, but in the global economy itself. So there are high stakes here. And despite the fact that all of the candidates running, all of the leaders of the major political parties are against Donald Trump and what he's doing, there are subtle differences between the leaders and their policies around this issue. And so our decision is very consequential. What direction are we going to go as Canadians? Can we save our bilateral relationship with the United States or not? It looks pretty tough now. But remember, Donald Trump's not going to be president forever. As much as he would like to be president forever, he won't be. So we have to sort of ask, do we want to sort of fundamentally restructure that relationship or just wait it out? And so that, I think, is a real interesting question for voters.
And yeah, I'm curious because, like, I think that relationship is an important conversation to have, right? I think depending on a lot of people I've talked to, you know, at the everyman level is like, well, is a certain leader going to maybe help bridge that connection, the relationship further, or will it potentially divide it? And like, what are you hearing at like the bigger scale of things? Like, do you think that that's a thing that can happen for all parties or no parties, or is it hard to predict essentially what's happening down south?
Well, it's certainly difficult to predict certain things. I mean, the president of the United States is a rather erratic decision maker. He says one thing one day and something else the next. But for this tariff issue, he seems to be sticking to his guns, at least for now. Now, maybe by the end of the day, something else will have happened. But I do think we're going to have to wrestle with this for at least the medium term. Who is the best person to deal with it, I suppose, is the question. Now, I feel a little bad for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, not necessarily that I'm just sort of a automatic supporter, just because my father supported the NDP's politics. I can sort of change my vote, and I do vote for different parties depending upon the election. But they've been kind of pushed out of the sort of discussion, haven't they? And their poll numbers kind of match. I mean, they're in single digits by many, many polls. And I think I just read it's at a 25-year low, the support from the NDP. So really, it's a two-party race or a two-person race, depends on how you want to frame it. And it's Mark Carney, of course, our prime minister, and Pierre Poilievre, who wants to be prime minister, who was expecting to be prime minister. But again, if we look at the polls, we see that the Liberals have really had a reversal of fortune. They were way behind.
It's wild, right?
It's wild. I've never seen anything like it. It was a 25-point deficit, and now it looks like they're 5 to 10 points ahead, depends on which poll you look at. So Canadians have been, I guess, impressed by Mark Carney, or they are glad to see the back of Justin Trudeau, one or the other. And Poilievre, of course, he had to change his strategy fundamentally as far as how the campaign would go. He was talking about axe the tax and how Justin Trudeau was not a good prime minister. Both of those issues are gone. So he has struggled, of course, to reframe things, but he campaigns on, and there are weeks until the election, and things will tighten up as they always do in an election like this. And so the real question is, is it Carney or Poilievre that can sort of chart the course going forward for Canada? And, if you're a, center-minded person, I think you have a difficult choice because as much as we'd like to sometimes characterize Poilievre and his politics as sort of far-right, I don't think that that's fair characterization. He's certainly a right-wing politician or a conservative politician, but a lot of his policies are also populist, so it kind of confuses matters in that regard. Carney, I would call a centrist through and through, as Liberals often are, even though Justin Trudeau did move the party to the left, sort of pushing into NDP's traditional sort of policies. Look at the dental care agreement, the pharmacare agreement that he basically made with the NDP. I'm not sure if Carney is that kind of guy. He's moved the party back to the center, if not the center-right, and I would characterize him as a neoliberal. Now, I can talk more about these terms, populist and neoliberal, if you'd like, and I think that's the big distinction between the two leaders. Do you want a populist leader or a neoliberal leader?
A couple things you said there that interesting, is both the historic sort of painting the picture of this election, the 35-point swing that the Liberals got in the polls. But can we believe polls? like polls have not been really kind to the people that make polls, and you don't get what you hear you're going to get. So let's talk about the mechanics of the polls and whether they actually reflect true voting intentions.
It has become a rather contentious issue. I think this kind of began in 2016, and looking at American politics, when Donald Trump won the presidency, the polls suggested that he was likely going to lose and that Hillary Clinton was going to win. That was a shocker, and most pollsters were rather embarrassed. Now, honestly, polls are within a margin of error, and that margin of error can be rather substantial depending upon how the vote is distributed. That's particularly true in Canada. So we haven't had the same kind of, shockers in Canada that the United States has experienced. Not saying that the polls can't be wrong. Some of the issues that I'm aware of around polling include the move to cell phones, right? Who has a landline anymore? And so that transition has occurred. Pollsters, of course, all now phone on cell phones almost entirely, so that's fine. The other issue here is a mistrust of polls, in part because of how inaccurate they may have been in some instances, and people lie. Now, again, lie might be a strong word here. They don't actually explain their true intention to the pollster. They sort of try to throw them for a loop. And that's actually rather common nowadays because of that mistrust for institutions like polling agencies. So sometimes if people lie, what do you do as a pollster? It's very, very difficult, right, to predict that sort of thing. And who lies more than other people is hard to say, right? But people who mistrust sort of institutions tend to sort of say, I'm going to sway this poll one way or the other by saying extreme things. That's another sort of thing. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most, 1 being the worst, right? How would you sort of answer this question? Well, people are picking all 1s and 10s because they're trying to manipulate the poll, which is kind of sophisticated, but it does throw things off. I would say so. But broadly speaking, just to really answer your question, I think we can trust the polls, but you have to look at that margin of error. And in particular in Canada, when we're looking at national polls, and I think this election it's particularly important to keep this in mind. It's where the vote actually lies. So conservative support in a place like Alberta is overwhelming. Now, it depends upon the poll you look at. They're 40, 50, even 55% ahead in Alberta. It's a rather remarkable amount. And you might say that's great. But actually, when you then look at their national numbers, you have to take that into account, don't you? You have to say, part of the reason why they have higher national numbers is this outrageous advantage they have in Alberta. And although Alberta is a very important province for our election, it doesn't have as many seats as Quebec and Ontario. Now, if you look at Ontario and Quebec, you can see a concentration of votes for the Liberals, right? And so even though you might say it's a 5 to 10% game here in the polling, right, you have to say, voter-rich Quebec and Ontario, right, have that Liberal advantage. And so the Liberals are kind of looking at that and going, I don't care if the polls are tightening. In fact, I think the way our vote is distributed means we're going to win, and we're likely going to win a majority government, right? So you just have to sort of dig down a little bit. Things can change, of course, but if I was reading those polls now, the national number is less important than those regional numbers or provincial numbers. That's the way I would sort of address that.
When you talk about the mechanics of the polls and the cell phones, I think it also for sure has something to do with the fact of who actually answers polls, period, right? I don't answer them on my phone. I don't participate. And even if I had a home phone, I probably wouldn't. It's just not my nature. But which demographic do you think actually participates in the polling?
Yes, well, again, that's deep inside the polling numbers. You can actually look that up in many polls. It's in the fine print, if you will, and so you can kind of find that out. I'm not entirely sure for each polling agency, but what they're trying to do is look at likely voters, right? That's the most powerful thing. So, for example, if you answer a poll and they say, do you plan to vote? And you say no, then your answer is actually not that relevant. If you say, yes, I am a likely voter, in fact, I guarantee you that I will vote, that's a far more powerful thing. And if you just look at it demographically, older people vote more. So I'm talking about people in that sort of 55 to 70 age bracket, they are the big prize as far as attracting voters to the polls, right? So if in other words, what I'm saying is, if you're a political party, you're courting them because they're likely voters. You're not courting, unfortunately, the 18 to 25s. The 18 to 25s, at least historically, now this election may change things. I think there'll be a very high voter turnout for this election. But the 18 to 25s, well, no, they don't come out to vote almost consistently, even in the 20%, right? So 20% of registered voters or people who can vote, I should say, will come out to vote depending upon the election. And so that's a problem for young people. If you're a young person and you say, why aren't my issues being talked about on the campaign? Why are our politicians not listening to me? I say back to you, that's why. You got to come out to vote. You have to have a strong voting bloc, and then your issues will be on the agenda. That's the idea.
So you said something really interesting there. I think you said there's going to be a strong voter turnout this year.
Yes, I think so.
I really want to know why, because if you look at the last couple elections, most recently the most provincial one, where the voter turnout was less than maybe desired.
It was in the 40s, I believe.
Yeah. So why do you view that differently this time?
Well, look, I don't think we can compare the provincial election, which, again, I'm on the record saying was absolutely unnecessary and, frankly, I think a waste of taxpayer dollars. The results, of course, actually bear that out. Nothing has changed in Queen's Park, and I think voters kind of sensed that. Even with the tariff talk, even if Doug Ford showed up on Fox News and, ran a pretty darn good campaign, I must say, it was inconsequential. And
I looked into the numbers, and they weren't that far off from some other of the elections. I was surprised at how many people voted in the provincial, but I'm following here.
Okay, all right. Again,
it was very close.
Yeah, but he was asking for a mandate. That's what he wanted, and
I agree too. I didn't think it was necessary. Yeah.
Under 50%, is that a mandate? Yeah. Under 50% of voters, and then I can't
well,
quite remember.
Trump had 49.7%.
Oh, okay, yes, and so I can't quite remember what
they're not
what
getting
he
their
got.
Mandate. Yeah.
What did he didn't get a stronger mandate? Is all I'm saying. So it was a big waste of time.
Yeah.
So I think we're not that surprised by that result or the voter turnout. The comparison I'm making, which I sort of mentioned in passing in my earlier comments, was around that 1988 election because it was so consequential. And I believe it was in a substantial way. It was not just rhetorically consequential, but practically so. Voters turned out. It was a very high voter turnout. Now, you got me here because I can't quite remember what it is, but I think it was in the high 70s, right, which is considerably high
hey, Ben,
for
do you mind looking that up?
Yeah, there we go.
Voter turnout 1988 federal election.
That's good. I hope I'm not way off here. That would be embarrassing.
Room for error, right? As they say.
Exactly.
He fact checks all of us.
Yeah.
1988.
Yeah.
It was actually the first real federal election that I paid attention to. I was at Canada College. I started in 86, journalism print.
Very good.
And so I was following that, and I wrote a column on the debate between Mulroney and Turner. And I was definitely against free trade. And my own bias thoughts, not as a journalist, but as watching and not. I lived in the States, in Ohio and Pittsburgh when I was growing up.
All right.
So I didn't have a whole lot of trust in the American system. I grew up in 83. I graduated from grade 12 in Ohio. So Ronald Reagan and all that was kind of scary. Star Wars and dealing with the Mideast, the Cold War. There's a lot of things happening. Led me to believe that I'm better off in Canada and that I prefer our system where we like our corruption a little more subtle.
1988, 75% turnout.
Oh, okay. I was in the margin of error. Not bad.
Yeah.
Hey,
Perfect.
that PhD's paying off.
That's a wild turnout number, too.
I know, but that's what I'm expecting this time around.
Okay.
Something in that vicinity.
Okay.
Canadians are going to turn out to vote, and they care. And if you're a vehement supporter of the Conservative Party, you are going to show up and put your vote on that ballot. If you're a vehement supporter of the Liberals, NDP, et cetera, you're going to show up because you care.
That's when Bob Wood got elected here.
Okay.
Yeah.
And people
I
care.
actually went into the booth and took a picture of my vote.
In 88?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's a Liberal, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
He
Okay.
beat
Again, I only
Mo
showed up
Mantha.
here in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
so.
he beat up a Mo Mantha, who was a very popular person from Sturgeon, but he didn't catch the Mulroney wave.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was looking at. If you talked to me a few months ago, as we were talking about the huge reversal in poll numbers, I was sort of saying blue wave. Right, in other words, the Conservatives, and again,
of course, if it wasn't for Trump, he had it in the bag.
Well, I think Trudeau resigning had a lot to do with it as well. I mean, again,
I think he would have been even further along if Trudeau stayed on.
Oh, yes. I agree.
Right?
Okay, we agree then.
Yeah, so I think he was heading towards a win. All he had to do is not cuddle up too much to the right of America, and he did that, though. He did that. He made that fatal mistake.
You're referring to Poilievre.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Poilievre was mimicking on many talking points and positions the same thing that was working for Trump.
Make Canada great again.
Make Canada great again. Don't trust the media. Treat them like poo.
Yeah.
And he went along those lines, and that's, I think, his fatal mistake. He proved himself very much like that.
Well, that's his politics, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at Poilievre going way back, I think he was an intern at the Fraser Institute. Again, if your viewers and listeners know the
A
Fraser
bastion
Institute.
of unbiased studies,
Yes,
right?
exactly. He's quite a conservative, if not right-wing institute. It's a credible think tank. Don't
He's
get
a
me
reformist,
wrong.
wasn't he?
Yeah, he was part of the Reform Party.
Yeah.
I think he worked under Preston Manning for a little while. So he grew up in that environment. So it's not surprising that he has. I don't want to say far right because that implies something different, but far.
I call it fringe right now.
I don't think Poilievre's fringe. I think he actually is.
No, I know, but the far right, when we talk
fringe
about,
right.
I call it the fringe right and the fringe left because it's not right. It's not right to everybody that's far right. Well, that's okay because those are the policies.
Yeah.
Right? Those are sort of a little bit less socially responsible, more capitalist, right?
Yeah.
Far right.
Sure.
Real conservative, but not with the fiscal conservative necessarily, just very anti-tax, anti-government.
Yeah, limited government kind of thinking. Yeah, that's right.
And the fringe right are anti-woke. That's kind of how I put it in my mind.
Yeah,
right?
Anti-immigrant.
Anti-immigrant,
well.
yes. Yeah,
that's right, that's right. And I do find the political spectrum, and indeed I talk in those terms, so I'm as guilty as anyone, but that political spectrum, left and right, it doesn't actually really reflect what's going on for many voters anyhow. So even using those terms, which I've just used, I don't think really hit the mark.
It's almost kind of like overly simplifying it, right? Like it's by giving it like a label that we kind of identify elsewhere but know here locally, because like every candidate has a unique position. Each party has evolving set of policies. Things change, right? And it's not clearly black and white anymore.
No, I think it's easy for us to be polarized, right? And that left-right spectrum is what makes that easy. Right?
Yeah, that's right. And I kind of grew up and studied it sort of in that paradigm, but I don't think it's that relevant any longer. Look at the Republican Party now. Being pro-tariff, for example, as we were sort of talking about in the context of 1988, if you were against tariffs, you were actually on the left, if not just the center left. It was the right, so to speak, the conservative, Brian Mulroney, a progressive conservative, we must say, who was pro-tariff. And so now the Liberals, of course, who kind of jumped on that bandwagon very quickly when Jean Chrétien became prime minister, signing lots of free trade deals. The Liberals now are the sort of free trade, as I've called them, neoliberal party. The Conservatives actually now hem and haw about that a little bit, partly as a reflection of what's going on in the United States, right? Do you want to put up some protections? Do you want to be a protectionist to help workers? And that's one of the other most amazing things about the contemporary conservative movement, blue-collar workers, the bread and butter of the left. When I was growing up, of the labor movement, when I was growing up, they have shifted, not entirely, but more and more, to conservatives. And conservatives who were vehemently opposed to unions now are like, well, maybe unions are okay because they're now voting and endorsing conservative.
They're aligning.
Yeah. So, again, the spectrum is all over the place. There is no spectrum.
No.
Really. That's what I'm saying.
Sports aren't just what we do. They're who we are. Source for Sports North Bay is your advocate, your local support system, and your biggest fan. 1321 Fisher Street has grown from a place where knowledgeable experts can help you find exactly the gear you need, to the hotbed of team uniforms, apparel and fanwear, to a community stronghold for all the things that truly matter to you and your family's sports journey. We love helping you find your first pair of skates, as much as we relish supporting local leagues, teams, and athletes. Wherever your sports journey takes you, make sure you visit Source for Sports North Bay at 1321 Fisher Street so we can help you along your way.
It seems like when, Trump decided to impose his tariffs and then Trudeau decided to step down, the change happened and people were like, well, what was like the first domino to fall, right? I mean, ultimately, it's kind of reflecting back now on Poilievre as like, well, he's had to change his policies, right? And he's had to change a bit of like what he's branding and advertising as his platform. Yeah. And so do you find like, what kind of process do you think that looks like? Like if you were peek behind the curtain, like, could you imagine, or could you maybe like detail like the difficulties of what that looks like in real time, like how that pivot looks?
Well, I think it's a lot of people banging their head against the wall. I mean, again, if I was in Poilievre's camp, again, you were sailing to a majority.
Yeah.
Poilievre, Prime Minister Poilievre, I was going to say 24 Sussex, but of course, no one lives in 24 Sussex anymore. I guess Rideau Cottage is where you live now if you're the Prime Minister. That's a whole other issue. So, yeah, they've had to pivot, as you've put it, and I don't think that they have really pulled it off. I mean, again, there's time. What's their message? What do Conservatives stand for? If you vote Conservative, what are you going to get? Frankly, even though I pay close attention to these things, I'm not so sure. I don't know really what they're talking about. Of course, they're releasing planks in their policy, in their platform, so I can read those and say that sounds like something that the Conservative Party of Canada would support. But what's their messaging,
I can tell you what their messaging is because my Facebook friends that are on the right
All right.
are parodying everything that they get sent.
Okay, you tell me.
And one thing is they say that, of course, it's an attack sort of thing on the Liberals. They're going to leave all the oil and everything in the ground because they won't let anything be built or used or sold, which is Bill 69, sort of environmental regulations and the process for making sure things don't go awry when we do development. So they're expanding on that, making it like he's against. They also are playing on the Carney's book, where there's some excerpts and writing where he sounded very much like he wants to be in control of everything that you ever do. Right. But I think he was just describing what will happen going forward if certain things happen. The other main plank that they're talking about, of course, CBC defunding, which is getting a little muddled on from the...
Well, we're suddenly nationalists, aren't we? Yeah. And the CBC is a national institution, right? And so you kind of go, oh, well, we need these to protect these national institutions. We can't just watch American news. Please help me.
Yeah, we're not going to defund
CNN
it
or
totally.
Fox News, I've had enough.
Yeah, they're not going to defund it totally now. They're going to be a little bit less blunt about it. We're watching Elon Musk rearrange things and with a baseball bat instead of a scalpel and a chainsaw, which is ridiculous. The way they were going about things.
Very much so, yes.
Geez, they really didn't have to do any of this.
No. Right? Well, I think what you said, though, and I mean, I agree, that sort of reflects a lot of what I've seen. We know what the Conservatives are opposed to. Yeah. That's for sure. So they're opposed to whatever, Carney, in these environmental bills, the carbon tax, right? What are they for? So my question is, I genuinely don't know the answer to this, but my question has been for Conservatives supporting the party, what is your climate change plan, right? You don't like the one we have now. That's very clear. And maybe there's an argument to be made that it doesn't work or hurts Canadians in their pocketbook. If you support the fact that climate change is a reality, and again, I know some people don't, but the vast majority of Canadians do, Conservatives included. What is your plan? And we just have heard nothing in that regard. So drill, baby, drill, pipeline here, pipeline there. But, okay, how do you mitigate all of those emissions going into the atmosphere and causing climate change, which is going to have a negative economic impact on Canada, right? So all of the money we may make from oil and gas will be taken away by all of these deficits that we get through, well, bad weather. Let's just put it that way. We'll have to just sort of strengthen our cities and their infrastructure. Very expensive. We're already in a massive infrastructure deficit in Canada. And we're going to have to prepare for the fact that these 100-year storms or 500-year storms that come along, of course, once every few centuries, are now going to be a regular event. That is incredibly expensive. So you're sort of what is the saying about Peter and Paul?
Yeah.
You know, that's what I'm sort of looking at when it comes to conservatives and their environmental policies.
I have a point about that, and just a clarification: that the Liberals actually haven't. They're not getting rid of all of their carbon pricing
That's
taxes. They're keeping it on industry,
Right.
taking them off the personal gas stations and
It's consumer
gasoline
taxes,
and
I think,
consumer,
right?
consumer
Yeah.
taxes.
That's right.
Yeah.
I believe in climate change, but I don't believe that we're going to be able to change anything the way we're going about it. And why I say that is we have the West wanting to drill, baby, drill. And, there's some value in that. Efficiencies in how things are burned maybe would be good. But in Ontario, we're going to dig for rare earths to make batteries that we haven't figured out yet, right?
Oh,
and we have
right.
to make tremendous investments in our electrical grid and infrastructure, which is carbon,
Yep.
to get to, right? And the wars, Russia, Ukraine, America wanting to take Ukraine, it's for the rare earth, for the batteries to save the planet. So we're blowing up things all day to save the planet because we want to be the ones with rare earth to make the batteries. So I'm a believer in climate change and we got to do something, but I don't believe in the plans that we have in place. And I didn't believe that Canada was going to be able to move the needle if China is still going to burn coal.
Right. Yes.
Right?
No. That's a criticism that is often brought up when it comes to these climate change accords. I think the Paris Accord being the most significant one now. Why is China not held to the same standard? Now there are some answers to that. They're playing catch up as far as their economy goes. They don't have a lot of access to oil, so they have to burn coal, which of course creates far more emissions. So there is some explanation there, but on the face of it, it doesn't seem fair. China is a massive economy, by some measures going to be the largest economy in the world, although we've been saying that for a little while. So that's for sure. And then just on the somewhat just going on a tangent, but based on what you said, I worry a little bit about these projects about going after rare earth metals because let's look at the Ring of Fire, somewhat in our region here.
Definitely affects us.
This is a 50-year sort of infrastructure project at minimum, if not a 100-year project. What is the technology actually going to look like in 50 years? Don't ask me, but it's not going to look like it does today. So that battery technology using those rare earth metals, they're very valuable now, very important. We've got a lot of them, right? But new technology may come around next week, next month, 10 years from now, and suddenly this massive multi-billion-dollar, frankly, tens of billions of dollars that we are going to dump into something like the Ring of Fire, suddenly we go, oh, we've been eclipsed by the technology. We don't need these metals anymore. I worry about that. Now, again, not my area of expertise, but you can kind of understand where I'm coming from here. So those kinds of decisions are very tough. And again, we're talking more about Ontario politics than federal politics now. But yeah.
Well, which brings up an interesting sort of phenomenon. We have Doug Ford back in Carney almost.
Yeah,
What is that?
interesting.
Yeah, they're playing.
Do you have any
friendly.
insights? Yeah.
Well, look, I'm going to have sort of a fairly superficial response, and then maybe we can kind of mine that for something a little bit deeper.
Nice.
I think that the history of Ontario is that when the federal government is conservative, Ontario is liberal. And when the federal government is liberal, Ontario is conservative. Now, again, that's kind of a trite answer, I appreciate. But yeah, voters in Ontario, Ontarian voters, they kind of look at these things and say we need some balance, right? Now, again, I think that is sort of...
Is it a flaw or a feature? Yeah.
I think it's anecdotal.
Yeah,
I don't even know if
yeah.
it's true. But that seems to be how it's been playing out. And I think that partly was what was on Ford's mind. I think Ford got pissed off at people like Danielle Smith as well, who's kind of aligned with Pierre Poilievre. Certainly that Alberta connection that we've talked a little bit about is quite significant there. And he was pissed off at Danielle Smith for not sort of playing along with the Team Canada approach, as we've been saying. And so I think that rubbed him the wrong way. And look, Carney is likely to be prime minister if the polls have anything to say about it. And so what does Ford think as premier? Who does he want who does he want to back? Does he want to back a winner? Yes, he does. And so that, I think, is part of the calculus as well. So is it savvy? Is it superficial? Maybe both.
Yeah, I think you're onto something with this historical Ontario versus Alberta sort of outlook on things, right? So that runs deep, right?
Very much so.
That very much might have something to do with what Doug Ford, who, hey, do you think he's ever going to think about running for prime minister?
He's positioning himself, is what you're suggesting.
Well, that's what
How
I'm
much
thinking.
French does the man speak?
Very little.
Yeah, so look, again, he's not an idiot by any stretch. He
knows. Okay.
He presents himself as sort of this working class guy, but he's quite a bright guy. I mean, again, people who know him can say that with confidence. Can he learn French? It's tough. And Carney, who knows French okay, that's been a sort of weak point for him. I think he gave himself a 4 out of 10 on sort of his oral French abilities.
And definitely something they bring up every time they mention it, right?
Yeah, and it's important for Quebec voters.
Yeah.
Right? And it's important for Canada. Look, it's not absolutely essential. Like, I think Diefenbaker barely spoke French, okay? But that was quite a long time ago, obviously, and maybe you could get away with it then. It's going to be tough for anyone to become prime minister if they're not bilingual. That's just the way it is. And
as long as you can speak French as well as Chrétien could speak English,
or just speak at all. I think he was incomprehensible in both languages. So.
Well, that's what I'm aiming for, and I think I'm halfway there.
Oh yes.
So we kind of got there naturally, but let's maybe make this more like local. Okay. So in terms of what you're hearing at the local level, candidates or not, like, how do you think this election is going to affect those in the Nipissing-Timiskaming region?
When you say affect, like who they're going to vote for?
Yeah, how's it going to matter to us here?
Oh, well, geez. I mean, look, we don't live in a bubble, of course. Like all Canadians, we are looking at what's happening south of the border. Things like tariffs on softwood lumber. Obviously, in Northern Ontario, softwood lumber is a significant driver of the economy. It's a very important renewable resource. I don't know if everybody knows, but softwood lumber has been under tariffs for many, many years. I think it's at 14.5%. It's going to go up to 21%, I think, pretty soon. And then perhaps we're going to have another massive percentage slapped upon softwood lumber there.
Yeah.
That's going to just devastate the forestry industry, and it's already struggling, of course, if you're aware of mill closures and all of the rest. And these are important jobs and important to particular communities in our region. So I think that's a very big problem. The mining industry, which has been somewhat spared short of steel and aluminum, which is more of a Quebec and Southern Ontario issue. But if the mining industry has these tariffs slapped on it, of course, that's going to affect our region. And again, a place like North Bay, even though we don't have mines actively being dug here, we, of course, support mines through equipment and engineering. And so it will cascade. If the mining industry goes bust, then North Bay will feel it. So the tariffs and how we negotiate going forward will be key. And why I say that is that our free trade agreement, the Canadian-U.S.-Mexico free trade agreement, is up for renegotiation next year.
Right.
So I think, in a way, why we were spared the sort of extra tariffs the rest of the world got, why Mexico and Canada were spared.
Just recently, you mean?
Just recently in that weird announcement he made in the Rose Garden, with Donald Trump, with the chart.
Presentation board.
Yeah, that was odd. Why we were spared is that negotiation actually is coming, and that's been the case, built into that agreement since we signed it. So,
Trump tossed that agreement out the window when he first got into the tariff talk, and right?
I think he's violated it. He's violated it.
I've covered. NAFTA disagreements through the courts with the softwood as well here, and we've lost a lot of our mills already because of it, the way that was done. And it was a continuous sort of legal battle to get the Americans to actually honor the agreement in the first place, every one of them, really.
Yeah.
It always is that way. And I had turned the sound off there, so I don't know why it's doing that, but sorry about that. Sorry about that, Ben. Supposed to be muted. Where was I?
You're talking about the Americans not respecting the softwood.
Yeah, so the Americans have never, that was my, everybody that would listen to me for the last 30 years told me that I had too much of an anti-American bias.
Yeah.
And I said, well, now they've proven me right. It's just that they'll throw their own cousin underneath the bus for $1, right? Yep. And that's just the way they're built. And not all of them. But the ones that matter do. You know, it's very. So it'd be interesting on that front.
I think the difference here is that, and again, I do think the Trump administration has violated the agreement that Trump himself negotiated, of course, during his last presidency. There are dispute mechanisms built into these free trade agreements. So like anything, there are violations, but the idea is, can they be amended? And often, not always, Canada ends up getting its way. It is surprising, right? And I talk about that with my students sometimes. You would think, you know, if might makes right, whether economic or military might, right, you know, you get what you want if you're powerful, then the United States should always beat up on Canada because we're 10 times the size they are, or 10 times less the size, I should say, more so on a military level. And yet, when it comes to these kinds of disputes and disagreements, actually, we are very successful. We use sort of boring backroom bureaucratic mechanisms like this dispute mechanism within the free trade agreement, and actually we come out ahead often, not always. Again, softwood lumber is just a decades-long sticking point here, and the Americans don't like how we manage our forests, and it has to kind of rotate around things like having crown land and stumpage fees. And again, I very quickly will get out of my depth if I go much further than that, but they think we're subsidizing our softwood lumber industry, and that is why they tariff it, because they think we have this unfair advantage because the government essentially is not charging enough in these stumpage fees. At least I understand it. Now I defer to you. Perhaps you know more about it than I.
Well, it's true.
Yeah.
We don't charge a whole lot on the stumpage because we want job creation and we want access to the resources. And perhaps what they should be doing is charging more on charging less for their stumpages rather than forcing the prices up higher. But what I wanted to talk about was the fact that we were looking at alternative economies and free trade agreements and different places to sell our stuff, right?
Right.
So, whatever softwood lumber that the Americans don't want to buy at the price we have, I'm sure China wants some. And I know Europe, they have good forestry there, but I know some of our stuff goes there. So we have options. It's not necessarily just north-south, right? So how that goes over with the Americans, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. Of course, we're looking for new markets for all of our products. It's a necessary thing to do. The problem is it's just so much easier to sell to the Americans. Just look on a map. There they are. They're a massive economy, the largest economy in the world. They need our stuff. I don't care what Trump says. When he says he doesn't need anything from Canada, that's just false. They desperately need things like our lumber, like our minerals, and like our manufactured products as well, including auto parts. They need all of those sorts of things. So again, when he says that, it's just the facts actually say otherwise. But of course, he likes alternative facts, as I believe they were once called.
You're making them up. But locally, the idea of the Conservatives want to take away some of the environmental oversight when it comes to projects, and what comes to mind is the East-West pipeline,
right?
And that comes right through our riding here.
Yeah.
And there was staunch opposition to it cutting over the lake that we get our drinking water here in North Bay. So I wonder how that might galvanize people, knowing that, and we deal with treaty land here, right? And we have to recognize that it had consultation with a negotiated, mitigated outcome is important. It's just not, hey, we're going to do this. If you don't like it, that's too bad, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So Ontario is an interesting situation, and so is Quebec when it comes to that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I think that when conservatives, if I may say, when they say we'll make things easier, we'll deregulate, they're ignoring the fact that you can change what's on a piece of paper, you can change your policy, you can even pass legislation, but it doesn't change treaty obligations. Those are significant. To violate treaty obligations, which we've done through the history of Canada, is going to be a huge step back for the reconciliation process. And so First Nations, Indigenous people have to be involved in resource development, including around pipelines. And the fact of the matter is, many First Nations communities, many Indigenous communities are into it. They're saying, yes, this is a place, like most Canadians, they say this is a place where we can gain prosperity and jobs and sort of a reliable economy. So it's not like no, you can't build anything, you can't dig anything. No, Indigenous communities are into it. They're participants in many massive infrastructure projects, pipeline projects included. The issue with the Energy East pipeline, going back to that example, I think is significant. If we're taking bitumen, oil sands oil, it used to be called tar sands oil, through that pipeline to refineries, let's say, in Quebec, which I believe was at least the plan previously, and I guess in southern Ontario as well. If there's a rupture in that pipeline, and it does go into our watershed, where we get our drinking water, North Bay will likely cease to exist as a community. Where are we going to get our water from, right?
Yeah.
Are we going to sort of truck it in? That has happened in some communities, of course, in the United States, where their
disasters happen.
Yeah, where their drinking water has been poisoned. How do you get that bitumen out of the watershed? Now, again, if it's a small spill, okay, maybe we can get away with it. If it's a massive spill, that may be the end. And so, again, that kind of goes back to my point that while it may seem cheaper, better in the short term to sort of deregulate environmental regulations, potentially, at least in the long term, it's going to be far more costly. Leaving climate change alone in that instance, destroying our entire community, I don't think is worth it.
And a possible change in technology, which would devalue that need for the pipeline eventually, right?
Exactly. Well, that's the point about batteries I was making before. Again, yes. I'm not an expert in this area, but when you're building a pipeline, it is a century-long piece of infrastructure. That's how long they're built for. I mean, they are amazing pieces of infrastructure. I mean, if you could imagine just how difficult and important pipeline is for our economy. But does it make sense in 2025 to start building pipelines? I mean, the federal government has already just built a pipeline, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, so I guess their answer is yes. But does it really make sense when technology can change radically, relatively quickly, and suddenly, what is this pipeline for? We just spent $80 billion on it. Do we need it anymore? Turns out we don't, right? What are we going to use it for? I'm not quite sure.
And we'll always see it in 21, 25.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. I can't predict what's going to happen. I'd be shocked if we were pumping oil sands oil through a pipeline in 21-25. I'd be quite surprised if we're still doing that. Again, call me, whatever thing you want. I just think that's just common sense.
I think, and some of my friends will just hate me for even mentioning it, but yes, keep an eye on the nuclear technology, right? Because a lot of people really look at that as potentially the only thing that we can do quickly, even if it takes 10 years. Yeah. That's quick, right? Infrastructure-wise and power-wise. And if we do onshore more, even in the States, and Canada is going to do it as well, as far as manufacturing, we're going to need quickly a lot more energy, right? And so, and it's not going to come from burning coal or bitumen, right?
No, I don't think so. No.
So,
yeah.
And the battery technology is very interesting. Our green technology is so dependent on China, and there's this factor of the tariffs and the retaliations. Like you're not going to see I think they have 85% of the solar cell market, right? They're the ones that are doing that, right? We're not.
No,
not to that extent.
No, I mean, again, there are issues that that have come up in this tariff talk about China, and again, you might argue that China has an unfair advantage, right? They have much lower labor costs. They have, of course, far less strict environmental regulations, labor conditions where workers actually build things like solar panels don't have to meet the same standards as they do in places like Canada. And that, of course, drives prices down. But there's a real human rights question there. And I think Canadians, when we actually brought up the issue of a free trade agreement with China, kind of sort of said there's a human rights question. And actually, that was a conservative point. Stephen Harper opposed that in part because of his criticism of China's human rights record. China was not so happy with those critiques. They never are. They come back very strongly, as they are, of course, to the tariffs that we see being imposed on them by the Americans now. And that is really where I'm paying a lot of attention to. That's sort of the center of the trade war as China and the United States go tit for tat.
The American human rights record has taken some black eyes there recently with their mass deportation and accidental deportations. But we're going to wrap it up in a bit. But I wanted to talk about something that's really very localized as well, but strategic voting and vote splitting. And when it's an epic historic election where there's really two parties really vying for this particular power to lead the country forward. Strategic voting.
Yes. Again, in our first past the post system here, it's kind of a winner-take-all situation. So I think if you're looking at voting, let's say, for the Greens or the NDP or even the People's Party, you have to sort of wrestle with that, point. You're throwing your vote away, essentially, right? Which sounds rather undemocratic. These are whatever your political views.
Well, it doesn't count for much. It doesn't count for much.
Okay, fair enough. But then if you have this larger concern, like you say, okay, realistically speaking, it's going to be the Liberals or Conservatives. I think so. I mean, Jagmeet, good for you. You're not going to be Prime Minister, man. So just accept it. So then, you have to ask the question, what's the lesser evil, right? That's the question, I guess. If you're for those other parties, then who do you vote for? And I think that's partly why the NDP are being squeezed out here. They are, again, in single digits in many of these polls. And I think as far as the polling goes, people are, if you will, strategically responding to those pollsters. Yeah. And so they're going to get hammered. And so I think that's what's going to even happen in our riding. Federally, the NDP don't do great here in this federal riding. They do better, of course, in the provincial riding. And so, it will be the Conservatives and the Liberals, and not having Anthony Rota in the race sort of brings it into question. We've also had a redistricting, so the borders of our riding have been redrawn. That happens every 10 years, at least. It doesn't always result in a redrawing, but they're reassessed every 10 years based upon census data. Yeah, and so our riding has changed. So it's a little hard to predict, if it's going to be the Liberals or the Conservatives.
Real quickly, how has it changed, just if you can describe it? Like, what was added and subtracted?
I think we sort of added, and again, I don't quite know the geography off the top of my head, but I think just looking at polling station data, it skews a little more conservative historically. That doesn't mean that because you voted Conservative last time, you're going to vote Conservative this time. So I do think the Conservatives may have had an opportunity to pick up this riding with Rota out, who's a very popular politician. Obviously, he's had his difficulties. He's not running again. I don't think he was planning on running again anyhow, if I understood that properly. Pauline Rochefort is obviously a formidable candidate, don't get me wrong. I do find it odd who the Conservatives settled on. I'm not sure if there were reasons why they didn't pick a candidate that actually lives here. The candidate
both
they
of the
chose,
ones who Gary Keller was up against had their chance.
Yeah, that's right. And again, look, I've looked at Keller's background, and it's very impressive. He's a very well-connected guy to the Conservative Party. I don't know enough to say that he's a potential cabinet minister. I think, people on the inside would know that. They might laugh at me even saying that. But, somebody with those kinds of connections, maybe that would be a very valuable thing to have as an MP. And maybe that would convince some voters. But I do think it rubs people a bit the wrong way how the Conservatives have picked their candidates this time around. You saw how well the Liberals did provincially when they had a parachute candidate who didn't campaign at all.
Yeah.
And boy, was that frustrating.
Yeah.
I was not too pleased. Just as someone who pays attention to politics, don't just put your name on the ballot. At least show up and give it a shot. And I think, the Liberals really paid for it at the polls. It's a bit different here. He's not your traditional parachute candidate. He's not just a name on the ballot. I think he is running a campaign, and we do see signs up.
And he has some connections to the area. His wife, Anna Piekarski.
Yeah. So.
She actually came through our newsroom at the Nugget as when she was at Schollard. Then she went on to be a lawyer, and she's very bright, and so family connections there.
Yeah, that counts. That counts for sure.
Sort of. I was surprised initially, but looking at the candidates he was up against, and there may be a bitterness amongst Conservatives here on how that happened.
Yeah, maybe.
And we'll see, I guess.
I think
we definitely will.
I think it'll be keen to see how this all wraps up, right? And so I think that's maybe a nice turning point for us as we kind of come home. Is that we want to talk about this afterwards. We want to see what happens. We're really keen to see, where North Bay and the area votes. Right.
Yes.
And so, Professor, thank you for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
We really appreciate it. Dave, would you like to?
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming on. I hope this is the first of many conversations we can have. I really enjoy hearing that your depth of understanding and expertise. So that's a great thing. I would like the viewers to tell us what you think, because we need some more input as we go along with this federal election. And vote April 28th for whoever you feel like it, of course. So very much thank you, and we look forward to talking to you again. And Chris, this is our first, and I think it's going to go well.
Yeah, it was fun. It was great to have that chat.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Echo Essentials election coverage for the federal election coming up. Please like and share and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And thank you very much, and have a good day.